And now I'd say, to take this even further, I believe since strong families are the foundation of a healthy society, families doing business and investments together is one of the most potent forces for good in the world.
Yeah.
When families use business as a tool for impact, and they create lasting legacies, not just of financial success, but purpose and values and true societal transformation.
It's exciting to see. It's exciting to have conversations about life, sustainability, legacy, and not just talking about financing all the time.
Don talks about really a commitment to leadership. I think that's the distinctive part that makes it so powerful.
I've achieved the American dream, and I'm committed to helping others do the same.
Hey everybody, Don Wenner here, joined with a special guest, my friend Lonnie. And Lonnie, I'm not even going to attempt, and you just said it to me, but I know I'm going to get it wrong. Pronounce your last name for us all.
It's Gienger, like singer, only Gienger.
All right, I like that, singer. All right. Well, joined by my guest, Lonnie Gienger here, who some of you have met. If you've joined us at our last couple of legacy and family events, you may have heard Lonnie and his wonderful wife talk at our events, but if you haven't, you're in for a treat. Lonnie is one of the most intentional people I know. Has dedicated, in addition to running a great business, a lot of his life and focus not only to his own family, but to helping other people like you and I to build thriving, incredible families and think about family a little bit different. So Lonnie, thank you for joining us today and welcome.
Thanks, Don. Appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation.
Where are you located in the world today, Lonnie?
I'm at my home office, which is about an hour and a half outside of Seattle, up in the mountains.
Awesome. Well, I know, like I said, some of our audience may have met you before or seen you on some different stages around the country. But if you don't mind, fill everybody in a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today, and why you dedicate so much time and focus to helping families like mine.
Well, that's a great kickoff question, Don, and like most great journeys in life, it often grows out of one's own pain and the learning that comes from that, and that's how we got to focusing on helping other families. Really had no intent to help other families. We were just trying to figure out how to do family better ourselves for a lot of years, right? And so I think for maybe 20 some years ago, we were at a place where, from outside appearances, we looked good, like, great picture of success with multiple businesses and active in our community and our church, and, looked good from the outside. But the truth is that our marriage was a shambles. We'd become partners in business and roommates at best. And even though we swore we would be married for life, when we got married and didn't even consider divorce and wouldn't even consider divorce, we were actually talking about going to a counselor to figure out how we get divorced in a way that was as healthy as possible for our really young kids at the time. And we realized that we had a lot to learn, to say the least. And it was actually in that same time frame that I was presenting at a leadership conference, and at one of the breaks, this business owner came up to me and he started complaining about his 1,000 employees and how they didn't do things right, make the right decisions when he wasn't around.
Yeah.
And I asked him basic questions like I'd ask most business leaders in a situation like that. Do you have basic things like written core values for your business so that your employees know how to make decisions when you're not around? Do you have a written mission and vision statement, written strategies, etc.? And this guy's name is Greg, still one of my dearest friends today. He said, well, I don't have that stuff written down, but it's my team. They've been with me for a long time since we started the company. They know what we stand for and where we're going. Why do I have to have that stuff written down? And I looked at Greg and I said, Greg, if you don't have those fundamental directional statements written down, you're never going to create a business that outlasts your ability to be there and make sure it's all happening right.
Yeah.
Well, what I didn't know at the time is that this guy, Greg, he was then and still is today the only successful business leader I know who's way more intentional about leading his family than he is about leading his businesses, actually. Just his calling, his focus, whatever you want to call it. And so he turned around and asked me, he said, Lonnie, do you have clear written core values for your family, written mission and vision, written strategies for your family? And I just bit right into it. I said, Greg, I don't have stuff written down for my family. It's my family. They know what we stand for and where we're going. And Greg looked at me in that first conversation. He said, Lonnie, what that tells me is you care way more about your business than you care about your family legacy. And honestly, I'd never thought of it that way. I argued back. I said, not really. My ego didn't allow me to accept that. But fortunately, Greg followed up with me with some other conversations, and over time we built a friendship. And now for a couple decades, Greg and his wife Rhonda have coached and prodded me and cajoled Shelly and I and encouraged us to think and act as intentionally about how we lead our family as how we lead our businesses. And that has changed everything for us. I mean, we wouldn't have, if it wasn't for another family coming alongside us with that kind of mentoring and encouragement, we wouldn't have most of what we enjoy the most, what brings the most fulfillment in life these days, which is doing life and doing business and investments with our family, just our adult kids and now our grandkids, and that's the most treasured part of life. And I don't know if I'd even be with my family, frankly, if it wasn't for the learnings through the years from other families. And of course, we have also done a lot of counseling and coaching that have helped me recognize. I mean, I was a mess. I didn't know it. I thought I was pretty good, but I was a workaholic for years. I would put my wife on my schedule, but it was really another thing in the midst of all the busy work I was trying to do. The great thing is I was trying to accomplish for my family, but in the process, I didn't recognize how deficient I was at really being able to emotionally attune with my wife and my kids and really take care of my inner life so that everything I do flows from the abundance of what's inside of me instead of just being a driven performer, which is really what I was, a workaholic driven performer.
Okay.
So it's been a lot of years of learning.
Well, thank you for sharing all that openly, and for our listeners here, give us the framework. That's how many years you've been married now?
So we've been married for 41 years,
Wow.
and we have 4 adult kids and 3 are married, so that means we have 7 children altogether now. And we have 6 grandkids with a 7th on the way.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, congrats. That's what it's all about. When you're talking about, caring more about your business than your family that your mentor, your friend Greg talked about, it made me think of a mutual friend of ours, Lloyd Reeb, and one of Lloyd's favorite things to questions to ask people is, if you and I were sitting on a park bench, looking out over the beautiful mountains near your home, and I asked you, and it was 30 years from now, and I asked you how the last 30 years of your life have gone. What will it have looked like for you to be able to say, the last 30 years of my life have been perfect, and they, we're all going to have trials and tribulations and loss and pain, but what would life look like 30 years from now for it to look perfect? And most people have never asked themselves a question like that, but many of us, if we took the time and we answered that question, you and I, we've probably never exactly compared notes here, but I bet you if you and I both filled that out or answered that question to each other, we'd have similar answers, right? We'd want strong relationships with the Lord, a great marriage, our children to be thriving, healthy and fit, and achieve our business goals. And so when we've taken people, Lloyd and I have had the joy of being a part of this with him, and we've taken people through that exercise, and what most people have never done, which just doing it is amazing. But then the next question Lloyd likes to ask people is, awesome, so what's your plan for that to happen? And very few actually have a plan for their life to turn out the way they want it to, right? We've got these plans and goals and strategic roadmaps for our businesses, but not for our lives. So how do you lay out the vision and direction for your family? What are the tips and tricks to how you end up with the life and family you want 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from today?
I have found that it has grown best out of just my own real lived experience in life and in business, what it takes to be intentional to get anything done in life, like you just alluded to, Don,
Yeah.
in business. It requires a specific plan that I then intentionally execute on. Now, it's not saying that I've learned to treat my family like a business at all. My family is not a business. However, it is saying that I've learned to, and I'm constantly learning to. It's an ongoing journey for me to
Yeah.
to think and act as intentionally and strategically about my family as I do about my business. So what that's looked like for us is it started out, a couple decades ago with the basics of developing what we call our family compass, which is similar to, it sounds like what you talk about in your compass. So developing personal and family compass, which is really about our written core values and our vision and our mission as a family. But then again, just like in business, you can't just develop those things and have them on a screen or a piece of paper and forget about them. For them to actually make a difference, you have to do something about it. So
Yeah.
in our family, we just learn to apply certain rhythms of meetings and conversations and internal kind of disciplines to make sure we kept those things in front of us. And it was, as basic as, like in business, I learned to really make the values in the company live. I have to refer to them often as the basis of decisions and actions,
Right.
and things that we celebrate in business. So I just apply the same thing in our family, and I still do that. Like, literally, our youngest son just made a decision to do something really cool next stage in his career, and my comments were to him about how he's just living out our family values of continual growth and leadership and etc. Right? So tying our actual real lived experience to our values, or if we're when the kids are younger, when we're correcting them about something, instead of just saying don't do that, we would try and tie that to one of our values. Like, instead of saying we don't watch that movie, it's not good for you. We would talk about how one of our values is to constantly leave everything, including our own minds, better than they were, and that movie probably won't accomplish that value, and here's why. Let's talk about that, right? So our kids at an early age, because we were taught to do that with our kids started making their own decisions based on our values, not based on what we told them to do or not to do. It was weird. Sometimes we would actually get calls from our kids' friends' parents when they would go to a party or a
Yeah.
youth group meeting, and our kids would choose not to watch a movie or not to eat something that was bad for them. And the parents would call us and chew us out for putting such rigid restrictions that we forced our kids not. And we had no idea they made that decision, right? But they were just making the decision based on values they were coming to embrace, right? So that concept has now carried forward into the next generations, where each of our married kids have their own set of family values, their own mission and vision for their sub-family unit that aligns with and builds on our prior generations' family compasses. And so now when we get together for our family gatherings, we talk about those things. We know what to celebrate about each other's journeys, and it's a blast.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, right before we got started on this webinar, and for anybody watching, I don't know what day it is you're watching this, but it's Valentine's Day that we're recording this, and so Lonnie and I talked about, hey, it's Valentine's Day. He said, as soon as we get done, he's heading off to have lunch with some friends, and then Valentine's dinner with his kids and his bride, and then special Valentine's dinner out tomorrow night, just the two of them, which, funny enough, is almost the exact same schedule that I'm doing as well, which we just chatted about. And so my point to that is, I know you live what you're talking about, right? You're intentionally making sure to make your family first and foremost, and to put the intentional effort and time into your marriage, into your children. And 41 years of marriage, you were open about the fact that it's not always been easy. It takes work, it takes effort. Give us some tips. 41 years of marriage, you've been really intentional since Greg gave you that wake-up call years back. what can we do here? You know, sitting on Valentine's Day, but whatever day you're listening to this, what can we do to build upon the rock of our family, which is our marriage? What are your tips? What's worked for you? What's been helpful?
Well, that's a pretty broad question to condense a whole lot of School of Hard Knocks learning into a few minutes here. But I mean, I will say I've certainly learned that building an extraordinary marriage doesn't happen by accident. What happened by accident was the opposite for us. I've learned it has to be what I call my highest priority project, even above career success or even above parenting. You know, a thriving marriage for us is built on a lot of intentional connection, deep trust, mutual commitment to growing together. So for Shelley and I, that means, you know, carving out consistent time for each other. We do what we call our daily heart check-ins, which I'm happy to describe what that looks like if you want.
Please.
We do weekly date nights and intentional getaways. But it's not just about spending time together, it's about being fully present and openly sharing about our dreams, our struggles, our experiences, and that F word that is so stinking hard for me, my feelings. I'm getting better at that, sharing my feelings. So yeah, I would say if I were to boil it down into like 3 or 4 key areas that I could unpack a bit more about what I've learned in marriage is, first one I alluded to is making Shelley my number one priority project. And I'll tell you where that came from. Years ago, we were in a couples counseling session to try to figure out how to fix the train wreck in our marriage. And the counselor asked Shelley a question that I thought was a very innocuous question. He said, "What would it feel like to you, Shelley, if you felt like Lonnie's highest priority project?" And she started crying, like big alligator tears. I'm like, like, what's that about? And it wasn't because she wanted to be a project, but she longed to feel that she truly mattered above everything else. And I realized through conversations after that just scheduling time wasn't enough. My heart and my mind needed to really reflect that she was my top priority. So, the counselor was speaking my language, because in business, I've typically had multiple businesses going at any one point in time and multiple projects within each business, right? Just like you do. And we know what it's like as business leaders to wake up each day, figure out what is our highest priority project today, and we put our best energy, our best creativity, our best problem-solving focus into that highest priority project. And so it was simply starting to switch my mindset, where I began to truly see my relationship with Shelley, our marriage, as always the highest priority project, right? And that paradigm shift changed a lot for us. So that was the first thing. The second thing that was a big one for me was, I'll say it, learning to value differences between Shelley and I instead of judging them. Early on, I think I definitely struggled to appreciate and value how different Shelley and I were.
Sure.
And there's been a ton of breakthroughs around that. One that's just kind of funny is, most people, you've heard of the love languages, the 5 love languages, right? So, years ago, read the book, took the test, found out that Shelley's top love language was words of affirmation. And you know what my first reaction was? To think, you know, that's actually kind of a weakness. Like, strong people don't need verbal encouragement, and you are so stinking strong. Why should I have to verbally encourage you? So I grew up in this wonderful, staunch German work ethic home where if you needed to be told you were good, it's because you didn't perform well enough to just know you were good, right? And so I just kind of treated Shelley that way. And she said, "Well, honey, you're encouraging your employees all the time. You're so encouraging to them and, giving them words of affirmation. You don't do that to me." And I said, "Well, of course not, because you don't need it." It's like I was speaking Chinese and she spoke English. We were speaking completely different love languages. And so when I started to think, what language does she need to hear "I love you" in? And that language was words of affirmation. Then it changed that, learn to write her notes and texts and, specifically be intentional about words of affirmation. And that was that difference, when I learned to appreciate that, and then speak in a language that was meaningful to her, deepen our connection in so many ways.
That's so awesome. Yes, we if anybody who isn't familiar with love languages, highly recommend. They're free online. They have adult version and they have a kids version that takes 5 minutes. And so we did it years ago. My wife's is quality time. Mine is acts of service. One of my sons is acts of service. One is words of affirmation. And it's so incredibly helpful when you understand that. And then using other assessments, like we use predictive index. We just last weekend were at an event and we did the Enneagram, which was really awesome. But better getting to understand your spouse and your kids through these assessments is pretty powerful. So I love that you share
So
this.
powerful.
Talk about the daily heart check-in.
Yeah, so our daily heart check-in was a discipline we've been doing now for several years, where at the end of each day, we typically do it on a walk. Sometimes we sit down on the couch and do it together. But it's a simple, powerful habit we just built into our daily routine. I'm not disciplined enough to do things ad hoc, and so I'm a guy that if I find something that works, I like to build it into my routine of life.
Yep.
So it's simple. We share one thing that we're grateful for in life today, and one thing we appreciate about ourselves, and one thing we appreciate about each other. So it's a really simple thing. And then the other part, so it's 3 gratitudes, and the other part is sharing 3 feelings. And that's the part that's been the steepest learning curve for me, is to share 3 feelings I had during the day. They could be good, bad, indifferent, whatever, it doesn't matter, and why I felt them. So I felt sad because, when I heard so-and-so say this, I reacted this way and I felt sad about that, whatever, right? And not to comment on each other's feelings, not to try and fix them or cure them or find a solution for them, but just to share our hearts. Sharing, so 3 feelings, 3 gratitudes, and the gratitudes are, what am I grateful for about today? What do I appreciate about you, right?
Yep.
And what do I appreciate about me, basically? So that small intentional practice has really created an ongoing rhythm of gratitude and deep connection. And my wife consistently tells me she deeply appreciates, especially when I share my feelings.
Awesome. I love that. So one of the things you talked about at our events and as part of kind of the things you help families with, which we'll get to a little bit more, is the 5, I don't remember the exact term used, but the 5 forms of capital. So talk a little about that. What are the different forms of capital? I think you use the term family capital. What are they, and how do they play together?
I love that question, Don. You know, it's like push and play on a on something that's gonna. Because this is a passion for me, because for so many years I defined success based primarily on money and things. Even though I grew up in a great Christian home with great values, seeing a longer term eternal and spiritual connection to life, I still somehow fell in that trap. And then as we started developing financial capital, I started to recognize this. You've heard the phrase shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in
Sure.
3 generations, right? Very common in most cultures of the world to have a saying like that, right?
Yep.
And that refers to this tragic fact that the stuff and visionary founders who create businesses and invest well and make fortunes isn't automatically kept and built on in future generations. In fact, stats show that families of financial wealth, the wealth is more likely to be lost by the 3rd, 4th generation. If it's not lost, it's often blamed for destroying the ambition or relationships of those next generations. And it's like for wealth creators who work hard our whole lives to create something great, it's just a terrible thought that what we create could be lost, or even worse, could cause damage to future generations. And despite all the good financial planning and education for our kids, that shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves proverb continues to just haunt the legacies of some of the smartest leaders and some of the greatest family fortunes in the world.
Yeah.
So, long story short, as I started to explore that and talk to families of wealth who actually had kept both the wealth and the relationships, the wealth and the wisdom passing down from generation to generation, I started to see a consistent pattern in multi-generational families of holistic success. And that pattern was that those families tended to first define wealth as holistically a sense of well-being in 5 different areas of life. And then they were intentional about how they developed and transferred the wealth in all 5 of these different areas of life, right? Yep. And what's more fascinating is we know empirically now that the generational loss of tangible capital is almost always preceded by a loss of the intangible capitals of the family, yep. Right? Those qualitative forms of wealth. So you ask, what are those? Those are I'll just run through them real quick in a brief description. So the 4 forms of non-financial or intangible or qualitative capitals are spiritual capital, relational capital, human capital, and societal capital. So I'll start with spiritual capital. Spiritual capital, it consists of the shared family culture or spirit, the values, the purpose. For many families, that's informed by or guided by or infused by a sense of faith or religion. For some families, it's not as overtly infused by that, but all families that do well over the generations have a clear sense of spiritual capital, right? So the question is, how does each generation dynamically build on that family's spiritual DNA in a way that allows them to optimize the best of the prior generations while still being fully empowered to be architects of their own destiny? There's a whole process and science behind that. So second form of capital is our family relational capital, and that refers to the affinity, the trust between the members of the family as well as trusted relationships outside the family.
Sure.
So the question is, what's the quality of those relational connections, and how is that being intentionally developed and transferred from generation to generation? Next form of capital is human capital. So human capital is about the human beings, right, of the family. Like in business, we know that the success of any business rises and falls on the human beings in the business who make the business happen, right? Same is true even to a greater extent in the family. So what are we doing in the family to intentionally build the character of the humans in the family, the competencies, skills, the core identity, the mental health, the physical health of each individual member of each generation?
Yep.
So that's human capital. And then societal capital is the last of the 4 forms of qualitative capital, which societal capital is all about the impact of our family, the impact of our business, our investments, everything we do on society, right? So the question there is, to what degree does our family have a deep understanding of and compassion for the needs and concerns of society? And to what degree are family members committed to take action to serve people individually? To what degree do we do that together? Do we have clarity of purpose around the impact we want to make on society now and in future generations? So that's the 4th form. Of course, the 5th form of capital, and I leave this last intentionally, is the one we usually think of when we talk about capital, which is financial capital.
Sure.
But that's really a lagging indicator of whether a family of wealth will flourish for generations, the financial capital. And ultimately, those families that flourish holistically for multiple generations are families who embrace financial capital as a tool or a lever to build and sustain those other 4 forms of qualitative capital of the family, right?
Yep.
So, and the truth is, most of us know a whole lot more about how to build financial capital than we know about how to build these non-financial capitals of our family. And that was me 20 years ago. My wife and I were so stinking focused on building multiple businesses and doing investments and, look good, but our marriage turned into something where it was a mess. And it wasn't until other families came alongside us who were further down the road on that journey of intentionally developing the qualitative capitals of the family that we began to first recognize that was important and then take those intentional steps to develop those in our own family.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to sort of switch gears quickly for a moment. Let's talk about books. First, you wrote a book, I think a few years ago now. I've read. I got a couple copies actually sitting right over here on my table, called Beyond Business. So tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, with that book, it again flowed out of my own my own messed up aspects of my life. So short version is I grew up as a pastor's kid, which I have great treasured value for, and grew up really believing that the church was the best, if not the only way to change the world, right? So I became a pastor, of course. Why wouldn't I? I want to make the world a better place. And my wife also grew up as a pastor's kid, Shelley.
Wow.
And we started out as pastors and quickly realized that our passion was helping people who wouldn't normally walk through the doors of a church. But the only problem was we didn't know anybody who didn't go to church. We just grew up so much in that world, right? So I realized I needed to step in business to build relationships and understanding. But with a theology education, I couldn't land a decent job. I'm permanently unemployable, true statement. So I had no choice but to start a business, and I fell in love with it. I love building leaders and teams and businesses that made a difference. But I had this internal tension. I had people telling me I'd left my highest calling, and when I still did a lot in the church world. When I was doing stuff in the church world, we have a nonprofit we've had for 25, 30 years that coaches pastors on leadership skills and things, and does church planting. When I was in that world, I was told that I was in my highest calling, and I felt great about it. But when I was in the business world, I often felt like I was making a more tangible, sometimes even bigger impact for good and for God, right? So for like 30 years, I lived with one foot in each world, building businesses that serve people and starting churches that serve people, but felt really torn, felt this angst in my heart, and I just felt like at one point some years ago, God was saying to me, you just need to sit down, shut up, and listen. Yeah, God says shut up to me often. And when I journal, sometimes I talk less and listen more, and so I just started journaling on weekends and long plane rides for a few years on this topic. And the more I reflected and wrote, the more I realized that business wasn't just a career. It was truly a powerful platform for the transformation of society.
Yeah.
And I actually became convinced that when Jesus talked about building his church, that he was describing something that looks a lot more like what happens when business leaders like you and I, and many listening to this, use their business platforms to bless others and build a better world, even more than it might look like when we walk into church on a Sunday. Not dissing what happens in church, it's very valuable. I'm just telling you my journey of recognizing what came out of this journey in this book now called Beyond Business was recognizing that business is probably the most powerful platform for building a better world for good and for God. And now I'd say to take this even further, I believe since strong families are the foundation of a healthy society, families doing business and investments together is one of the most potent forces for good in the world.
Yeah.
When families use business as a tool for impact and they create lasting legacies, not just of financial success, but purpose, of values, and true societal transformation. So anyway, that's where that came from, and yeah.
Awesome. Switch a little from that. So you wrote that book. You're writing another book right now, which we get to in a moment. Outside of your own book, what's the most and you can't use the Bible either. What's the most impactful book you've ever read? What's your favorite book you'd recommend to our audience?
You had to say I can't use the Bible. I get it, because that honestly, I think no other book has given me more wisdom. And honestly, most books on wisdom, I think, are building on what's already in there.
Yeah.
So that aside, lately I've been doing a deep dive into books about building multi-generational family success. Shouldn't surprise you after what we've talked about here, right? And I've been soaking up wisdom from mentors and families and books that talk about that. So a few that stand out for me, I've got some right here in my library. One is two or three books by J. Hughes. James E. Hughes is the author. He's become a dear friend and a mentor. He's in his mid-80s, and for 50-some years, he's coached multi-generational families on how to develop holistic success. And his dad did the same thing, and his grandpa did the same thing. So he's literally introduced me to families that his dad, and grandpa have worked with for 8 generations.
Wow.
And by the way, those families, like one of them doesn't live too far from me here, and their annual family gatherings are over 400 family member shareholders.
Wow.
Plus a bunch of others that still they actually look forward to. They can't wait to get together and be together with that extended family. I mean, that's what I want for my family 100 years from now, right? It's where the family can't wait to get together with all their cousins, aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, second, third cousins, etc., right? So James Hughes, from all of his experience and his dad and grandpa's experience, wrote a number of books, but my 2 favorite are his kind of original foundation book is called Family Wealth, which is a classic on sustaining wealth across generations.
It is, yeah.
And then his most recent one is called Complete Family Wealth, which he does a deeper dive on the purpose of family wealth in that one. Love that one. Another author I love in this space is Dennis Jaffe, and the book I like of his most is called Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, which is the result of a significant study that he, actually in collaboration with Jay Hughes, did of dozens and dozens of 100-year-old family businesses that were still thriving after 100 years, and what are the learnings from that. And again, both of those books point out that all those families have this multiple lens view of wealth.
Yep.
And are intentional about that. Another book is that changed my view in a number of areas is a book by Dr. Rabbi Daniel Lapin, I think is his name. It's called Thou Shalt Prosper. It's an incredible book about wealth, faith, and prosperity from a Judeo point of view. And he changed my view on the purpose of financial estates, and that those families that have had the greatest impact on society throughout generations don't view their financial estate as something the next generation gets to use or spend. And it is not just given to the next generation, but that the next generations view the platform of financial wealth that one generation creates as a basis for the next generation to do even more good for God and more good for the world. And he points out from his research and belief that that's one of the reasons why the Jewish people have typically had a stronger influence on society than any other culture, despite inordinate persecution and challenges throughout history. Anyway, it's a very interesting read. So those
Awesome.
are.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was more than I bargained for. That was awesome. Some incredible ones. A couple I haven't read, so I look forward to it. So thank you for that very much, Lonnie. It's been awesome. When you came and spoke at our couple events, there were a lot of people I know coming to grab you and Shelly afterwards, wanting to know how they could learn more. And I'm so grateful that off of that you've put together this webinar series. And we'll put it into the show notes for everybody, into the info, no matter where you're listening to the podcast or watching it. But it's Lonnie Gienger.com/webinar, but we'll put that in the notes. And Lonnie put together a 3-part series, first on the 3-part webinar series, first on Family Compass, then Holistic Wealth of Life, and then Family Relational Rhythms. You heard a little bit about some of those today. So grateful for that. So if you're interested in learning more from Lonnie, please sign up for his webinars and gain some of the wisdom of Lonnie and his better half, Shelly, as well. Thank you, Lonnie, so much for being here with us today. Hope you have an incredible Valentine's Day with your wife and with your family. Can't wait to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.